Live television has a way of amplifying every word, every pause, every look. When the cameras are rolling and the nation is watching, some people crack under pressure. Others, however, rise with a confidence that makes the room feel like it's standing still. That's exactly what happened the moment Jasmine Crockett took the mic. Live television has a way of amplifying every word, every pause, every look. When the cameras are rolling and the nation is watching, some people crack under pressure. Others, however, rise with a confidence that makes the room feel like it's standing still. That's exactly what happened the moment Jasmine Crockett took the mic. There were no teleprompters guiding her thoughts, no advisors whispering in her ear, just a sharp mind, a steel spine, and the fire of someone who's tired of the games and the gaslighting. And the second she began to speak, you could tell something was about to shift. She didn't enter the conversation with hesitation. No, she came prepared. Every word was measured, not rehearsed. Her voice wasn't raised to shout over others, but carried the calm authority of someone who knew her truth could not be shaken. The air around her grew tense, not because she was being confrontational, but because what she said was undeniably real. She didn't speak in talking points or sound bites. She laid out facts like a surgeon wielding a scalpel, precise, controlled, and impossible to ignore. The panel didn't expect her to take it there. You could tell by the way heads turned, eyebrows lifted, mouths slightly parted. One by one, the guests on set realized this wasn't going to be another tame exchange. This was a reckoning. The weight behind her words wasn't just rhetorical, it was personal, it was lived. And in a world where so many dance around the truth, she chose to walk straight into the storm. She laid out a timeline, clear, unfiltered. She pointed to patterns that had been dismissed for years, threading them together like clues in a courtroom. The accusations weren't wild speculation. They were drawn from public record, documented incidents, and blatant contradictions that had long gone unchecked. She didn't need to shout to make her point land. Her tone was even, but it carried a kind of fury that's born from watching people dodge accountability for too long. There was no malice in her delivery, no hint of personal vendetta. What made it powerful wasn't the emotion, it was the clarity. She wasn't trying to entertain, she was trying to enlighten. And as she kept speaking, you could almost feel the narrative breaking apart. What had once been protected by spin and misdirection was now being exposed in plain sight. The truth had walked into the room, and it was wearing a blazer, speaking with poise and refusing to be silenced. There were moments when it looked like the hosts didn't quite know how to respond. You could see the uncertainty on their faces, and internal struggle between staying composed and reacting to the sheer weight of what was being revealed. The silence between questions stretched longer than usual, as if they were buying time to process the blows just delivered. And it wasn't just the people on set who felt it. Within minutes, clips started circulating online. People were sharing, commenting, reacting. You could tell by the tone of the responses that this wasn't just another viral moment. It was a truth people had been hungry to hear. Something about her delivery cut through the noise. It wasn't about scoring points. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about laying bare what so many had either missed or ignored. In that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was channeling the frustration of countless people who had been dismissed, talked over, or made to feel like their concerns didn't matter. She became a vessel for a broader voice, one that demanded transparency and justice without apology. It was as if the words had been waiting in the air for someone brave enough to speak them, and she stepped into that role without hesitation. By the time she finished, there was no need for follow-up, no grand finale. She didn't have to prove anything. The truth had already done the work. You could feel the shift in energy. A wall had cracked, a mask had slipped, and she had done it all without losing her cool. The moment the words left her mouth, the atmosphere shifted. It was like watching a live wire spark on camera, instantaneous, electrifying, impossible to ignore. What she said wasn't just bold, it was surgical, delivered with precision, wrapped. In calm authority, it landed like a punch that no one saw coming. And while the room fell into a momentary hush, somewhere far from that studio, the reaction was volcanic. You didn't need to see it firsthand to know what was happening behind closed doors. The political machine she challenged is one that doesn't handle exposure well. The image is everything, crafted, polished, carefully maintained. But truth has a way of tearing through veneers, and in one sentence, she tore through layers that had been years in the making. Not with slander, not with spin, but with an undeniable chain of facts that had long been ignored, deliberately buried, or misrepresented. There was no shouting, no dramatic gesture. That wasn't her style. What made it sting was the calm with which she said it. Like someone holding up a mirror and refusing to lower it, no matter how uncomfortable the reflection. It wasn't an attack. It was an unmasking. And those watching, both in the studio and across the country, could feel it. The kind of moment that hits deep, not just because of what was said, but because it had been held back for so long. The fallout started almost immediately. Phones rang in offices that are usually sealed tight with protocol. Staffers scrambled for statements. Media consultants drafted rebuttals. You could feel the panic ripple through the usual circuits of power. And yet it wasn't just panic, it was fury. Not the fury of someone wronged, but the fury of someone exposed. In spaces where control is everything, losing composure is the worst-case scenario. And make no mistake, what happened wasn't just frustration, it was a full-blown unraveling. Those closest to the situation reported the reaction in hushed tones, raised voices, thrown objects, a scramble to rewrite the narrative before it could settle into the public consciousness. But the clip had already gone viral. The truth was out there, and no amount of spin could unring the bell. All of this came from one voice. One woman standing on live television who refused to play by the unwritten rules of deference and silence. She didn't just speak, she declared. And with each line, she stripped away the mythos surrounding her target, layer by layer, until all that remained was the raw truth. Vulnerable, defenseless, undeniable. And that's what stung the most. Not just the content of her words, but who she was to say them. She wasn't supposed to be the one holding the mic. She wasn't supposed to be this composed, this articulate, this dangerous to the narrative. But there she was, graceful, grounded, and unwilling to blink. No matter how much the pressure built, she remained unmoved, like a stone in the middle of a raging tide. That reaction, the explosion behind closed doors, was proof of her impact. It confirmed everything she said without a single rebuttal, needing to be voiced. Because when the truth hits that hard, it doesn't just challenge someone's public persona. It threatens the very identity they've sold to the world. And when that identity begins to crack, even the most carefully built empires start to tremble. In politics, few things are more revealing than how someone reacts when they're confronted with inconvenient truth. Do they deflect? Do they deny? Or do they come apart in a moment of unguarded emotion? This time, it was the latter. And while most people will never see the inside of that private room where it all went down, the fallout spoke volumes. You could see it in the sudden press, statements, the late-night phone calls, the advisors canceling interviews, the shift from confident swagger to defensive posture. This wasn't just a headline, it was a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. And all it took was one woman, one voice, one televised truth to tear the whole illusion wide open. The moment it aired, it was clear something extraordinary had happened. Not just another political talking point or viral gaffe. This was different. Within minutes, the clip had made its way from television to social media, from TikTok to X, from group chats to podcasts. It spread like a spark in dry grass. The soundbite, the delivery, the look in her eyes, it all struck a chord, and the internet responded with force. It wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Hashtags flooded, timelines, screenshots and quotes started circulating in memes, reels, and stitched commentary videos. It wasn't orchestrated. No campaign had pushed it. It wasn't some influencer moment cooked up in a PR office. It was raw, real, and people recognized that instantly. For once, it felt like someone wasn't trying to impress a camera. They were trying to tell the truth. Commentators on both sides jumped in, some cheering, others scrambling to spin, but no one could deny the impact. People who had never heard her name before were now searching it. They wanted to see more. They wanted to know who she was, how long she'd been in the fight, and why nobody had put a mic in front of her sooner. She wasn't polished in a way that felt distant. She was precise in a way that made her feel dangerous to the status quo. The replies said it all. Finally, someone said it. This is what we've been waiting for. She just spoke for millions. That level of resonance doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't come from flash. It comes from authenticity, from someone standing in their truth so firmly that even the algorithm can't ignore it. The more people shared it, the more it confirmed what many had long suspected but hadn't seen so clearly until that moment. Journalists began writing think pieces within hours. Editorials came out praising her poise and power. Analysts debated the long-term impact of what had happened, not just on a person's image, but on the larger movement she seemed to embody. She didn't go into that studio to cause a storm, but a storm formed around her anyway. Not because she provoked it, but because she brought the temperature of the country to the surface. The replay value was part of the magic. The clip wasn't just watched, it was dissected. People went back to watch her facial expression at the exact moment the statement landed. They noticed how she didn't flinch when others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They zoomed in on the reactions of the hosts, the other panelists, the awkward silences that stretched just a little too long. It wasn't theater. It was impact. And people couldn't look away. Young viewers especially latched on. There was something about the way she carried herself, cool under fire, unbothered by the usual games, that made her instantly relatable. It wasn't performative, it was powerful. Students, activists, everyday people started quoting her in their own posts, remixing her words into music clips, animations, even campaign slogans. What began as a moment quickly became a movement. And, while some tried to diminish it, saying it was just social media buzz, the numbers told a different story. Millions of views, thousands of comments, dozens of mainstream outlets picking it up before the day was over. When something goes that viral without being manufactured, it sends a message bigger than any speech ever could. People are watching, they're listening, and they're hungry for something real. She didn't chase the spotlight. The spotlight found her, and she didn't blink. In an age where authenticity is rare and silence is often safer, she chose to speak. And the world heard her loud and clear. The fire she lit with just a few sentences couldn't be contained by studio walls or political narratives. It leapt onto screens across the country, into conversations at dinner tables and text threads, and planted a flag that said, without apology, that truth still has power when someone's brave enough to speak it. It didn't feel like just another television moment. It felt like a shift, small at first, but undeniable. In a world where politics is often reduced to sound bites and carefully choreographed talking points, this was something else entirely. What happened in those few minutes of live TV had the potential to ripple far beyond the studio, echoing through the halls of power and into the upcoming battle for the future of the country. There was something about the timing. Not just when she said it, but how she said it. Calm, direct, absolutely unshaken. It was the kind of moment strategists often try to create and rarely pull off. One person, one truth, and a platform big enough that the message couldn't be buried. She didn't raise her voice or lean on theatrics. She didn't have to. Her clarity did all the heavy lifting. For those watching, it didn't just feel like a political jab. It felt like a revelation. Not a wild accusation or a petty attack, but a pattern brought to light with precision and intent. She laid it out like a map, connecting dots that many had seen but never fully understood until now. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. And, because it was based on facts, not speculation, it hit harder than any insult ever could. What made it even more remarkable was who it came from. She isn't someone who's typically handed the spotlight or framed as the voice of national disruption. But in that moment, she became the one to say what others had only hinted at. That kind of courage, measured and unrelenting, doesn't just score political points. It reframes the debate entirely. Behind the scenes, you could sense the tremors. Political analysts who are normally quick to move on from moments like this lingered on it. Panelists who usually pivoted away from confrontation stayed in the moment longer than usual, maybe because they knew it mattered, maybe because they were still figuring out what it all meant. Commentators took to the airwaves to assess the fallout. They didn't ask whether it would be remembered, they asked how deep it would cut. When a single moment changes the tone of a race, people notice. And this did. It introduced a new line of questioning, one that may haunt future debates, interviews, and campaign rallies. Once a truth is spoken on a stage that large, it can't be taken back, no matter how hard some try. Even more importantly, it offered a glimpse into what the next election cycle might actually look like. Less polish, more grit. Less caution, more conviction. She represented a new kind of political force, not just bold, but prepared. Not just unafraid, but uncompromising. And the audience could feel it. The real-time response wasn't just about admiration. It was about possibility. People started asking what it would look like if more leaders spoke like that, acted like that, believed like that. The line she delivered has already been etched into the collective political consciousness. It's the kind of statement that turns into a rallying cry, not because it was dramatic, but because it cut through the fog. In a sea of distractions, it was a beam of clarity. The fact that it caused discomfort wasn't a weakness. It was a signal that the right nerve had been struck. Those invested in keeping things the way they are took notice. Efforts to dismiss her as inexperienced or overly emotional fell flat. The usual tropes didn't stick because what she delivered was too grounded, too well documented, too deliberate to ignore. When someone speaks with both credibility and conviction, it becomes very difficult to discredit them without looking desperate. That's the part that really changes the game. She didn't just make a splash, she made a case. And it's the kind of case that people will refer back to, especially when the stakes rise and voters start tuning in more closely. That short segment on live TV might not have seemed like much in the moment, but it planted seeds that could grow into something much bigger. Something that shifts the tone of debates, alters campaign strategies, and forces a new kind of accountability on everyone involved. In the end, it wasn't the volume of her voice that shook the room, it was the weight of her words. What unfolded on live television wasn't a rant, a rehearsed attack, or a spectacle meant to dominate headlines. It was clarity, a rare and unapologetic moment of someone refusing to play by the rules of spin and silence. She stood firm, grounded not in partisanship but in principle, and in doing so, she reminded millions that truth still matters, especially when spoken in places built to avoid it. The reactions that followed, the viral clips, the shaken responses, the behind-the-scenes fallout, weren't just signs of impact. They were proof of how powerful one voice can be when it refuses to look away from what others have tried to ignore. And that voice didn't belong to someone trying to be famous or controversial. It belonged to someone who understood the responsibility of the platform and didn't squander it. She didn't win a debate. She didn't destroy anyone with insults or showmanship. What she did was far more lasting. She changed the conversation. She took control of a narrative that had been distorted for far too long and gave people something they weren't expecting: honesty with teeth. And when honesty is delivered with that much composure, it does more than shock. It sticks. Her presence on that stage, her ability to stay composed while delivering something so damning, signaled that the rules have changed. No longer can those protected by power assume that the truth will remain hidden. No longer can scripted performances and media-trained smiles shield the public from reality. Because moments like this don't just expose individuals, they expose systems, habits, patterns. And people are watching. Not just scrolling past on their phones or half listening while doing something else. They're watching because they're hungry for someone who doesn't just speak for attention, but speaks for them. She did that. She stood in the gap between politics as usual and the truth people deserve. And she didn't flinch. As the headlines fade and the clips are archived, one thing will remain. That moment, a few minutes of live TV where everything changed.